안녕하세요. 스페셜 세션 내일을 창조하는 메이커 교육의 좌장을 맡은 경희대학교 강인혜입니다. 메이커 교육에 대해서 이번 세션에서는 논의를 할 건데요. 여러분도 아시다시피 요즘에 전 세계적으로 확장되고 있는 그 메이커 운동으로부터 메이커 교육이 기인하고 있습니다. 그래서 메이커 교육을 이해하기 위해서는 메이커 운동에 대한 특징도 이해하고 있는 것이 굉장히 도움이 되는데요. 메이커 운동의 경우는 그 메이커의 주체가 누구냐에 따라서 어떤 사람들에게는 그것이 기술 혁신을 통한 사회 구조의 변화라고 보는 사람들도 있고, 또 어떤 사람들은 사회 혁신을 위해서 공동체적인 가치를 회복하는 그런 사회적 혁신의 방향으로 가고 있다라고 보는 것을 메이커 운동이라고 보는 사람들도 있습니다. 이와 같이 메이커 운동은 그 주체가 누구냐에 따라서 다양하게 정의를 되고 있는데, 그만큼 메이커 운동에서 비롯된 메이커 교육도 굉장히 아주 넓은 스펙트럼으로 이해할 수 있습니다. 하지만은 저희가 그래도 불구하고 가장 공통적으로 두 가지의 특성을 메이커 교육으로 잡는다면은, 첫째는 Material Competence라고 해서 지금 현 시대에 존재하고 있는 다양한 테크놀로지, 기술, 도구, 재료들을 자기들의 니즈에 따라서 선택하고 활용할 수 있는 그 능력이 한편으로 필요하다라고 하고 있습니다. 또 하나의 그런 특징 중에 하나는 메이커 교육하면 메이커 운동과 더불어 강조되고 있는 메이커 정신이라는 것이 있습니다. 메이커 정신에서 강조하는 바는 그 메이커들이 각각 개개인들이 스스로에게 모든 활동의 주체가 되는 그 임파워먼트를 부여하는 개인이 됩니다. 그러면서 동시에 개인에 끝나는 것이 아니라 자기 주위에 있는 공동체나 사회 문제에 대해서 관심을 갖고 사회 참여를 통해서 사회 변화를 하고자 하는 체인지 메이커로서의 역할을 함양하고자 합니다. 따라서 이 큰 두 가지 축을 가지고 메이커 교육을 이해하시면 오늘 여러분들께서 들으실 그 세 분의 발표자들의 내용이 잘 이해되시리라고 생각을 합니다. 그러면 먼저 첫 번째 발표자이신 팹 재단 대표이신 쉐리 라시터스의 발표를 듣도록 하겠습니다. 여러분의 뜨거운 박수를 부탁드리겠습니다.
Good morning. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here. I'm going to talk with you today about the Maker Movement, Fab Labs as a innovation and education network. I have the great honor and pleasure of being the director of the Fab Foundation, but also of working at MIT with Professor Neil Gershenfeld, who founded the Fab Lab Network, on the outreach, the educational outreach that we do in community. Oh, I wanted to say, this is a great video. If you could turn up, yes, the volume. It's probably one of the most exciting and scariest things I've seen in the last decade. And I just want you to look at this and reflect on what it tells to us about education, workforce, and the future. She could spit in the eyes of fools if they ask her to focus on. Their life on Mars. So that is a really interesting video if you think about it. The young people that you saw in that video, we're talking about, of course, SpaceX and Elon Musk's organization, right? And the young people that you saw where the launch takes place, etc. That was the workforce. They were engaged. They were inspired. They were working on something that they felt was very meaningful in the world, right? And you saw that they failed. You saw that one of the rockets came down and, just crashed. But the other two came down with pinpoint perfection on a very small stamp of the Earth, and they came down exactly at the same time together. What it took to make that happen is extraordinary, and what it took was really a very different kind of worker and workforce. So this is on the job board of SpaceX, right? And you may recognize some of these jobs as things you saw in the 20th century, right? So we have a CNC operator, we have technicians, we have floor supervisors, et cetera. But in this day and age, and in the context of something like the space industry, it means something else entirely. It's not just knowing how to operate a machine, not knowing how just to fix a machine, but it's everything. It's understanding the design, it's understanding the materials you're working with, it's programming these machines or whatever it is to do what you want them to do, and it's also analyzing the data that comes out of what you made or what's coming out of the machines to understand what's wrong or what's right or how to make it better. And so these are multiple skills, they're integrated skills, they're interdisciplinary skills. And this is what we are not doing with education now. We are not educating our youth, nor are we retraining our current workforce to address these kinds of jobs. And these are the jobs of the future. So we've heard a lot about the Industrial Revolution. You had the first one, which was in mechanization, and the second Industrial Revolution around mass production, the third Industrial Revolution around computation. But now we're in the middle, or starting the fourth Industrial Revolution, which is about artificial intelligence, it's about the Internet of Things, it's about cyber human systems, it's about technologies that we don't even know yet exist, right? And there's all sorts of hyperbole. Some of it is accurate, and some of it is not, about how many millions of jobs we're going to lose. And but what they don't really, and they vary greatly, and some of them are way overblown. But we will lose jobs, but we will also gain jobs. So just like Elon Musk and the space industry, we're going to create new industries with these technologies, and we're going to create millions of new jobs and new opportunity. But we still have to train that workforce, and we still have to look at that, embrace the way that we educate so that it can be inclusive and everyone can participate, right? So if you think about these innovative networks that are emerging, right, there are several levels of engagement. There's sort of the global level, which is like the maker movement, Fab Labs, the open source community, blockchain. They're all doing really, really interesting, innovative work, and most of the time they're doing it outside of industry, right, which is pretty interesting. And then if you specifically get into one network, and I'm talking about the Fab Lab network here, this is a community of practice, right? It's a nimble community of change agents, and we use technology as our platform for change, for innovation and for change. And then there's the individual within that network who is learning by making things, and he's learning, he or she is learning in a cross-disciplinary, iterative way that is really meaningful, personally meaningful and engaging to them. And so this is where we feel like learning is going and innovation is going. So this is kind of a Fab Lab. This is a Fab Lab in Iceland. It's run by Frosty, which is kind of fun. And it's full of digital fabrication equipment, meaning computer-controlled design, computer-controlled fabrication equipment. It has like CNC, and it has lasers and 3D printers and programming and electronics, everything that would allow you to make a functional system or to make just about anything that you can imagine. And so it's a very enabling environment. And what we see around the world is the map up here at the top the top left, is the Fab Lab network. And actually, we're about 1,500 labs in 100 countries right now, growing very fast. We're doubling in size about every year and a half. Now, if you look at the bottom map is all of the hacker spaces, maker spaces, fab labs, innovation hubs around the world that we've found so far. There are more than 5,000, and they all share kind of some of the same tools and processes. They're in informal environments, but they share the same tools and processes and mindset, and we have an opportunity to leverage this globally distributed group of change makers, in essence, who we can leverage it for education, we can leverage it for innovation, we can leverage it for humanitarian purposes, right? So we have a tremendous opportunity here to leverage these tools and processes that are scaling so quickly. So this is a little bit complicated, but this is on the left side here. This is Moore's law. For transistors and for components going on integrated circuits, the first two graphs. And as you can see, Moore's law was tracked over 50 years, and it exponentially grew to the point where it was doubling in size about every year and a half, these components and transistors. On the bottom of that same graph is a graph of that same picture is a graph of the Fab Lab network, digital fabrication, right? It is tracked over maybe 10 or 15 years, and it's following exactly the same trajectory. And when you get to that sort of exponential moment, that's when things disrupt, right? That's when technologies disrupt, and that's where we are. We're disrupting. On the right side, you'll see a comparison of the development of computation and the proliferation of computation. And on the right side of this picture, you'll see the same trajectory of digital fabrication. So in computation, we started out with one giant room-sized computer that probably cost $1 million. On the right side, you see one giant milling machine that was made at MIT for about $1 million. And as you track through the PDP and the sort of do-it-yourself hacker world, and then sort of these wonderful computational devices that are all around us, you see that we get to an enormous saturation in the world. The same thing is happening with digital fabrication. And we're doing it, we get to fab labs, which are about $100,000. Then we get to the DIY machines for about $1,000. And then we get down to the components, the smart materials that we want to develop that take on the form, you program them to take on the form and the function that you tell them to. And they're really cheap, and they'll be really ubiquitous if it goes the way we think it is. So this started at MIT. The Center for Bits and Atoms is, Neil directs the Center for Bits and Atoms, and really what we do is we're merging physical science and computer science. This is where digital fabrication and the future of fabrication we feel like is happening, where bits meet atoms. And we're borrowing our ideas from biology. So if you think about the way that each of us was made, we started out as a soup of proteins and amino acids, and we sent a code of instructions into that soup, DNA, RNA, and we grew into who we are now. We're doing the same thing with materials, with digital materials. So we're taking a finite set of discrete materials, about 25 or so, and combining them in different ways, programming them to take on whatever form and function we tell them to. And they have the added advantage that you can disassemble them to recycle them into something else. So it's a brave new world that we're working on. In the process of doing this, we built a facility at MIT that really allows us to explore and make things from the nanoscale all the way up to the building scale. And our students got very, very excited about this, and they said, we want to learn how to do this, and we want to learn how to do this not only for what we do here at university, but also for our own personal purposes. So we kind of tripped over this idea of personal fabrication. We've repackaged this now for the global network, and we're experimenting with this idea of a global fab academy, right? So each fab lab in the network that participates is a classroom in this global campus. And it's not online learning, it's not like a MOOC. It's a blended learning environment. And what we see is that in the 20 weeks that you learn all the tools and processes of digital fabrication and you make this wonderful, meaningful project to you, we're seeing as sophisticated and as interesting of projects come out of the global network as what we see at MIT. And that's actually really interesting. So, you know, innovation doesn't have to happen in this one central place. Innovation can happen everywhere. So this is the kind of learning that happens in the Global Fab Academy, and this is one particular student's portfolio. We make them demonstrate their and document their portfolio each week. Guillaume wanted to make an aquaponics structure and system, and he did. You can see each week he learned something else. He designs something. He uses the 3D printers. He uses the CNC routers. He designs his own circuits. He integrates the system. It's absolutely incredible, and his documentation is actually quite good. But what happened is he ended up selling kits. He's now got a business where he sells these kits so that you can make your own aquaponics for your back porch or whatever, but also he is selling the service now of having communities or businesses come together to grow things. So it's not only just sort of the physical prototype, it's the social implications of doing that as well. So this is kind of the pedagogy of making, as we see it, or of digital fabrication. It's the individual makes something, and in the process of that, they have to design and imagine design. They create it, they fail, they iterate, and finally they come up with the innovation, right? But it's project-based. It's personally meaningful, right? It's applied. You pull for the knowledge you need when you need it, and you apply it right away. And it's just-in-time learning, and it's peer-to-peer learning. So it's not, you know, it's not the star on the stage telling you what you need to know. It's a community learning together, right? And we're now starting to move into K through 12 education through our SCOPES project. The SCOPES project is really about helping support teachers as they move into this brave new world and as they start to try and teach STEM or STEAM skills through using digital fabrication as a platform. And it's really not the tools, it's not the materials, it is the integrated learning, the interdisciplinary learning, the very deep learning that happens when you embody very, very abstract concepts in the physical world when you make things, right? Now, this is more, this community now, especially the ones that are in Fab Academy, have started to embrace sort of larger global issues. This is the Fab City project. It's a 40-year roadmap to creating self-sustainable cities. These aren't smart cities. It's not about data and it's not about efficiency. That's just one small part of making a sustainable city. This is about importing data and then making everything else happen locally, and exporting data, but making all of your manufacturing maybe happen locally, and also sort of trying to change the mindsets of citizens to more sustainable practices. So we've got a number of cities signed up, and these are all cities that have very strong Fab Lab presence. We've got Barcelona, we've got Paris, we even have the Kingdom of Bhutan has signed up for this. And basically every city is going to contribute some knowledge that their Fab Lab network, some research that they're doing to find sustainability in some sector of what we do when we live and work in the city, and then contribute that in 40 years to a roadmap, a playbook as it were, for cities to live sustainably. And so that's a very, very exciting project across the network. Humanitarian aid, makers, and fabbers, as I like to call them, makers and fabbers and hackers are all very, very interested in doing something meaningful that will change the world and help the world. And humanitarian aid is one of those areas, one of those sectors that they're very interested in. Not only just to make products and distribute products that will be useful in crisis, but really it's about innovating for the humanitarian sector. What does the humanitarian sector need? The question is, how can we generalize now? How can we take this amazing thing that's happening in maker spaces and hacker spaces and fab labs around the world and put it into formal education and equalize the, you know, sort of make it an equitable playing field so that everybody can participate in this prosperity, this promising future that we have ahead of us. So thank you very much.
So good morning. Glad to be here. Thank you so much, Sherry. That was fascinating. I learned something every time new about the Fab Lab. So my name's Sylvia Martinez, and I want to talk about the global maker movement in terms of K-12 schools. What's happening in K-12 schools, from the youngest children to children that are about to go to college, and how this is a point in history when we really have an opportunity to do the things that we've always talked about doing, about making school more relevant to kids today. Now, personally, my degree was in electrical engineering, and I worked in aerospace for many years. I worked on satellite technology. We were sending rockets to the moon, and I worked on some of the early GPS satellite technology back when it was just a research project. And now I have one on my phone, and I don't even remember what it was like to not have GPS. After that, I went and became a video game programmer. Just, I don't know, it seemed logical at the time. But what I learned through all of those experiences was how different the work of real scientists and engineers was than the way I was taught in school. And in fact, it was a lot more like my dad's auto shop than the very dry lessons that I sat through in school. And I started to wonder why this was so. Why are we so insistent on teaching these things in such a dry way, not giving kids experiences that would really excite them? And because of the maker movement, I started to see a way to do this in schools. Right now, I'm working around the world with schools, trying to help teachers understand how to make this happen, also with groups of educators like the Fab Learn Fellows. Fab Learn is a project out of Stanford University. It's a takeoff on the Fab Lab groups, only these are Fab Labs in K-12 schools. So I help these educators write the stories about what's really happening in K-12 schools. Because a lot of times people hear about the maker movement and they say, is it really happening? Well, it is, but the teachers are too busy to even talk about it and share their stories. So that's what we're trying to do, is create stories that everyone across the world can understand. Now, the maker movement, this is something that I see as very relevant to education. It's not just about making cool things, although that's great. 3D printing is a miracle. You're literally making something out of nothing. But in schools, students can use this in a very specific way to understand the process of design with mathematics and computer technology that's never before possible, having them and making them able to make things that have never before possible. The maker movement provides this idea that the world is a problem-solving engine, and everyone is part of this collective brain. So that if I have a problem, I could ask the person next to me, or someone across the world may have the answer. And if I find a solution, it's my job to share it with everyone. Now, I think this is part of this industrial revolution. And just like the last industrial revolutions, it's not just about steam engines. It's not just about technology. It's about what happened to the culture and society because of that. The last industrial revolution changed how people lived, how they worked, and how they learned. And that's what I'm interested in, because, look, we could talk about the business practices that are going to be disrupted and everything, but I care about schools. So I co-authored a book called Invent to Learn, Making Tinkering and Engineering to help build a bridge between the maker movement and educators. Not to tell educators what to do, because we know how kids learn. They learn by having deep experiences with things that they care about, alongside of experts, both near and far, who care about the kids they're working with. And I think that's a very important thing to remember when we talk about the future, is teachers are crucial to this development. They're not in the way of modern learning. Teachers are the future of learning. Now, I know that sounds kind of obvious, but a lot of people ignore the fact that kids need inspiration and passion sitting right next to them. They need someone who cares about what they think and what they do on a day-to-day basis. So when I talk to schools, I talk about a lot of different tools, but in general, I don't say everything maker is good for schools. Some things are too expensive, some things are dangerous, some things are just toys. But there are a few things that are especially useful in schools, and they fall into three categories: computer-controlled fabrication, physical computing, robotics to wearable computing, and programming. Programming is the nervous system of the maker movement. So fabrication, you've all seen a 3D printer by now. We can make fascinating things, things that are going to go into space, things that help people, shoes, food, everything. But the process is what's important for kids to learn. And schools are adopting 3D printers all over the world, and now laser cutters as well. This is a school in Songdo, not far from here, where the students learn to design wind-powered cars and then test them and design them again because they can. When you add computation and feedback and control with small devices like this microbit microcontroller, $15 US, you can add interactivity to everything. And when you add interactivity to the world, you can make things that interest you. You can make robots, you could make a glove that reads sign language, you could make a dress that responds to pollution, you can make ballet slippers that track dance movements. All of these are made with the same engineering design process that real scientists and engineers use. It's not dumbing down, we're going to sew, girls like sewing, so we're going to make ballet shoes, and boys like robots. No, this is on-ramps for more kinds of kids who are interested in all kinds of things, not just the ones who are going to go get the good STEM jobs. This is about making sense of your world and taking charge of your world with devices that are easy to use and accessible. All design starts with an idea in your head. When you make that idea real, you now have something that you can work on, because it never works the first time. So you have to try it again, you have to build on it, you have to iterate, and those things take time. And that's where you start to run into the issues of how does this work in school? Where do you find the time to let kids do things over again? What if they don't all come up with the right answer? How we answer those questions is crucial for the next century. And we have tools that are absolutely fabulous now. We have tools where kids can control AR experiences and artificial intelligence experiences. Scratch 3 is coming out in January. It's the third iteration of the free version of the Scratch programming language. It just passed 40 million projects on the Scratch site. That's 40 million times that kids said, I can do this, and showed the whole world that they can. And I'm going to say this really clearly. Yes, everybody should learn to code. It's not just for kids who are going to be programmers. It's about making sense of the world, because coding helps you make sense of mathematics, and making sense of mathematics means that a whole world opens to you. I look at it as coding as a liberal art. You're being able to speak a new language and understand the way the world works in a way that, sure, some kids are going to become computer scientists, but other kids are going to say, I know how the world works, the underlying technology that's going on in my world. This is a graph, just like Sherry was talking about, that exponential growth curve. This is the number of children using Scratch every year. You see that curve, that doubling effect? That's when just the magic happens. These kids know that computers are for them to program, not to be controlled by computers. Now, what's next? What's coming next is even more amazing, because people think, oh, the maker movement, yeah, you can print out some plastic things and it's a little bit, some interesting electronics. But what's going to happen next is absolutely incredible, and it's coming to schools. Sherry talked a bit about this biological revolution, and Nicholas Negroponte, who's predicted pretty much everything in the digital revolution for the past 30 years, now says biotech is the new digital. You can program behavior in cells, and that helps solve that Moore's law problem where we cannot squeeze any more efficiency out of computers, and yet the data we need, the computational technology we need, is still on an exponential rise. Biological organisms that you can program to act like data storage and computers is going to help solve that problem. We're understanding millions of years of evolution and turning that into a way for people to design biological organisms using those same design principles that have worked for scientists and engineers. And this is happening right now in schools too, because if biotech is the new digital, then grow is the new make. We can grow things and copy the kinds of things that nature can do and use them for fabrication, like understanding how bone structures work and using that mathematics instead of square brick by brick mathematics when you do 3D printing, or understand how silkworms build structures. Petrochemicals, obviously one of the most polluting industries in the world. Well, what if we could make plastic out of biological materials? These things are happening right now, and schools are adapting the tools and technology because of the maker movement idea that all of this should be open source. Things like the Open Insulin Project says, why should insulin research be in the hands of hospitals? Why can't it be in the hands of people who have diabetes? And they make everything that they do open. Dyes and fabrics are another one of the most polluting industries in the world, where you can ferment cloth. You can create dyes that do not pollute. And that's a comic book for middle school students about how to do these things in your biology class. So the question is biology class going to change? Is electronics class going to change? Is math class going to change in the face of all these things? Can school change? How do we fit this into what we're already doing? Well, I can tell you that we had revolutions like this before. Back in 1478, there was a new arithmetic textbook called the Treviso Arithmetic Textbook. That was a revolution because it had things like word problems, and it had algebra, and they used zero, these crazy ideas. And what did people say? That's not real math. You're going to ruin our kids. The kids won't learn at all. Well, what actually happened is there were like secret workshops where people learned mathematics on the side, and it started a revolution that transformed business in Europe because people could suddenly do the math that they needed to get their jobs done. Now, here we are 500 plus years later, we're still using Treviso arithmetic and insisting that's the only way that people learn math. That's the only way that we get jobs done. And it's not anymore. We have computers now. Computers have changed mathematics for every job, every job. And Conrad Wolfram says that we spend 106 lifetimes every day teaching people how to calculate like a computer. We're wasting kids' time. And we have to stop doing that. There are things we can use instead, things to teach the complex mathematics of the present day, like the Wolfram Technology System for high schools. There's high school curriculum that uses programming and computational technology to solve problems that exist in the world today, not to teach the math that was invented to deal with the problems of big numbers before we had computers. Now, people say it's not about the technology, but I have to say, I want to argue for the technology because, as Seymour Papert said, who's the father of educational technology, if you can use technology to make things, you can make more interesting things. And you can learn a lot more by making them. And I think as a teacher, when you're watching kids make interesting things, you can learn more about the learning of the child. So I think this maker has amazing implications for schools. It means you can do more, you can do it now, you can do it more precisely, you can make things you care about, that the world cares about, and you can learn more by making them. Schools should love this, right? Well, not really. Because sometimes when you do things and you don't know what the answer is going to be, it can be uncomfortable, it can be uncertain, things can not work out like you planned, it can take extra time. And schools don't like that. That can be uncomfortable, but being uncomfortable isn't always a problem. Sometimes that's what change feels like. And sometimes this is going to kind of hurt when we argue about what has to stay and what has to go and what's right for kids. But that's what disruption is. And this disruption has to happen in schools too, and it has to happen not just at the top level where we decide, the smart people, what everyone is going to do and then we'll just share it with everyone else. That's not how this works. The most important change that we need to make is we need to eliminate large swaths of what we're teaching in schools today. We're wasting kids' time. Why? Because they have to pass a test. Why? Because they do. And those kinds of questions are hard because everyone has a favorite subject. What are you going to eliminate? Are you going to eliminate logarithms? Oh no, we have to learn. Every little thing, every little pebble goes into this pond and pretty soon there's no water left. We're strangling kids. We are killing their souls with things that they don't care about, when there's so much we could be sharing with them that helps them be the change makers they want to be. So if there's one thought I want to leave you with today about making, it's that it's not a shopping list. It's not about buying the right 3D printer. It's not about making a special room. I know schools are building maker spaces, and that's lovely. But building a makerspace that the kids go visit once a month means that nothing else has to change. That's the wrong way to do this. We have to make this happen in real schools. We cannot sprinkle magic maker dust on the existing curriculum and expect change. And there's no magic dust anywhere. There's no magic design thinking dust. There's no magic, anything dust that's going to fix the problem we have in schools. It takes hard work. It takes collaboration. It takes all of us, including the kids, because this is their world. This is what they need to do. They need their world to make sense to them. And I think this is an incredibly opportune time to do this. We have never had more interesting tools, more complex things, more tougher problems that we need to solve. And we need everybody on board. We need everybody to pitch in and say, I can do this. And those are the kinds of things you hear maker kids say. They take the opportunity to make sense of their world and to take charge of their world, because it is their world. Thank you so much.
여러분 안녕하세요. 예, 반갑습니다. 방금 소개받은 고산입니다. 오늘 이렇게 많은 분들이 메이커 교육에 관련해서 이 자리해 주시고, 또 제가 이 자리에서 그 메이커 교육에 대해서 말을 할 수 있게 된 것에 대해서 굉장히 영광스럽게 생각합니다. 제가 오늘 여러분께 드릴 말씀은 이 메이커 운동이라는 것을 제가 한국 사회에서 경험을 했던 그 과정을 좀 말씀을 드리고자 합니다. 그 제목을 메이커 운동, 그리고 도심 재생, 그리고 4차 산업혁명이라고 잡았거든요. 이 한 꼭지 꼭지 하나가 제가 바로 다 경험했던 겁니다. 메이커 운동을 통해서. 우선 메이커 운동과 팹랩에 대해서 말씀을 드릴게요. 2011년도에 타이드라는 단체를 만들었습니다. 비영리법인인데 타이드는 테크놀로지, 이미지네이션, 디자인, 그리고 안트러프러너십, 기술 기반의 창업을 지원하는 비영리 법인이었습니다. 저희는 창업을 지원하되 하드웨어 창업을 지원하자. 그래서 우리나라에서 세운상가 다 아시죠, 여러분? 예, 뭐 한 바퀴만 돌면은 로켓도 만들고 탱크도 만든다는 거짓말이 있는 그런 세운상가입니다. 아직까지도 제조 기반이 거기 많이 남아 있습니다. 그래서 거기에 자리를 잡고 팹랩을 만들었습니다. 팹랩이 지금 전 세계에 1,300개 정도 있다고 합니다. 저희도 그 중에 하나고요. 한국에서 처음으로 팹랩 서울을 만들었고 지금 여러 곳에 운영을 하고 있고요. 팹랩의 모습은 이렇습니다. 이런 디지털 제작 장비들 갖추어 놓고 이걸 사용하는 교육을 알려드리고, 그리고 와서 예약해서 이걸 가지고 마음껏 자기가 원하는 것을 만들어 볼 수 있는 그런 곳입니다. 팹랩에서 이루어지고 있는 활동들을 영상으로 보시면 조금 이해하기가 쉬우실 거예요. 여러 가지 디지털 제작 장비들을 갖춰 놓고 다양한 교육이 이루어집니다. 대상도 굉장히 다양해요. 오늘 우리 주제인 아주 어린 친구들을 위한 교육에서부터 시작해서 창업을 준비하는 어른들에게까지 다양한 교육이 진행됩니다. 세운상가 5층에 위치하고 있고요. 보시는 것처럼 우리나라 경제성장의 아이코닉한 그런 곳이죠, 세운상가가. 네, 아직까지도 거기엔 제조 기반이 많이 남아 있습니다. 그래서 이런 제조 기반을 레버리지해서 다음 세대의 하드웨어 창업 혹은 다음 세대의 메이커 운동에 연결시키고자 세운상가의 자리를 잡았었습니다. 메이커 아카데미는 10주 정도 되는 과정이고요. 이걸 통해 실제 창업으로 연결된 케이스도 있고, 페피는 티네이저들을 위한 그런 메이커 교육입니다. 이런 것들을 아이들이 다 설계해서 만들고 하니까 대단한 거죠. 그리고 뭐 어른들을 위한 워크숍도 당연히 많이 있습니다. 저는 드론 같은 것들을 바디까지 모든 파트들 안에 들어간 전자회로까지 직접 만들어서 카메라 장착해서 날릴 수가 있습니다. 그리고 이 메이커 운동이라는 것이 점점 더 문화적으로 확산이 돼가기 시작하는 느낌을 많이 받습니다. 이것은 저희가 아티스트들이랑 같이 콜라보로 만든 메이커 페스티벌인데요. 악기를 메이커들이 만들고 뮤지션들이 그것을 연주하는 그런 대회였습니다. 그리고 메이킹을 주제로 한 메이커톤 1박 2일, 2박 3일 동안 뭐 아이디어를 구현해냈는데 그 구현의 질이 굉장히 높습니다. 그리고 메이커 운동을 널리 알리기 위해서 이런 방송 활동도 저희가 했었습니다. 대략 어떤 활동을 해야 하는지 좀 느낌이 오시죠? 이 메이커 공간이라 메이커 스페이스라는 곳은 사실 장비와 공간만 있어도 되는 게 아니라 그 안에 끊임없이 새로운 컨텐츠들이 진행이 돼야 됩니다. 그래서 우리가 메이커 교육을 논할 때도 이 메이커 교육에 다양한 컨텐츠를 확보하기 위해서 과연 어떤 식으로 이게 진행돼야 될까라는 고민들을 조금씩 하게 됐는데요. 여기 보시는 것들이 저희가 쭉 진행해 왔던 그런 것들입니다. 저희가 전국에 메이커 스페이스를 꽤나 많이 운영을 했었습니다. 근데 지금 운영하는 곳은 서울, 수원, 그리고 제주도 세 곳이고요. 왜냐하면 저희가 그 팹랩을 시작한 이후로 정부에서도 이런 메이커에 대한 중요성을 공감하고 전국에 굉장히 많은 메이커 스페이스를 만들었습니다. 그래서 처음에는 저희가 이런 운동을 위한 마중물 역할로 공간을 직접 운영했지만 이제는 그런 시기는 지났다고 판단이 되고 이제는 아까 말씀드렸던 것처럼 이 전국에 퍼져 있는 메이커 스페이스들의 어떤 컨텐츠를 제공할 수 있을까를 사실은 고민을 하기 시작했고요. 그리고 더 재미있는 것은 이 팹랩이라는 모델 자체가 사실은 미국에서 시작이 됐고 전 세계로 퍼져나간 모델이었는데 그걸 우리가 수용했던 거죠. 근데 이제는 우리나라가 주체가 돼서 이 모델을 해외에 퍼뜨려주는 역할을 시작했습니다. 굉장히 멋진 일이라고 생각하는데요. 저희가 K-랩이라는 이름으로 한국 정부와 함께 개발도상국에 이런 랩을 하나씩 지어줘 가고 있습니다. 우리나라 청년들이 이런 메이커 교육을 직접 받아서 이 개도국에 가서 거기 현지에 있는 분들에게 이 메이커 교육을 전수해드리고 그들이 현지에 있는 문제를 스스로 해결하는 걸 도와드리는 겁니다. 저희가 어디에 가서 남의 문제를 해결하는 건 굉장히 오만한 생각이죠. 하지만 그들이 스스로의 문제를 발견하고 그 문제를 쉽게 해결하기 위해서 그런 교육을 시켜드리고 같이 이런 랩을 하나 지어드리는 그런 사업입니다. 더 많이 이런 것들이 이런 사업이 많은 나라에 펼쳐져서 우리 청년들이 국내에서만 자기의 미래를 걱정할 게 아니라 해외에서도 여러 가지 기회를 발견하고 또 그곳에서 좋은 활동도 할 수 있게 되기를 바랍니다. 저희가 세운상가 이 자리를 잡으면서 또 하나 염두에 둔 게 있었어요. 그게 바로 도심 재생운동이었습니다. 세운상가는 여러분 아시다시피 굉장히 다 쓰러져 가고 사실 젊은이들이 거의 찾지 않는 그런 공간이었어요. 근데 저희가 보니까 이 세운상가를 끼고 있는 청계천을 따라서 명동, 청계천 그리고 동대문이 위치하고 있는데 명동이 광화문 일대는 금융중심 그리고 세운상가 이 일대는 제조중심 그리고 조금 더 가서 동대문 일대는 디자인 중심이에요. 그래서 이 청계천 따라 쭉 연결을 하면 뭐 뉴욕 엘리처럼 청계 엘리 뭐 이런 걸 만들 수 있겠다라고 생각을 했고 이 아이디어를 가지고 서울시장님을 찾아가서 제가 한 2번 정도 PT를 했습니다. 이 아이디어를 채택해 주셨고 세운상가가 많이 바뀌었습니다. 세운상가가 이런 모습이었고요. 지금 세운상가를 보시면 이런 모습입니다. 네. 저 가운데 뭐라고 써 있는 게 보이시죠? 이 뒷모습인데요. 가운데에 이렇게 써 있습니다. Make a City 세운. 그래서 원래는 이 세운상가가 다 철거될 그런 계획이 있었지만 저희가 들어가서 도심 재생운동을 함으로 인해서 그 이전에 있던 제조 인프라들을 활용해서 새로운 레벨의 그런 메이커 시티를 만들어 보자라는 것이 서울시랑 공감이 됐고 그곳을 다시 새로운 모습으로 탈바꿈시켰습니다. 그래서 요즘에 가보면은 세운상가에서 뭐 이런 재미난 프로젝트들도 많이 진행이 되고요. 거기에 꼭 팹랩 서울만이 아니라 다른 메이커 스페이스들이 많이 생기고 있습니다. 그리고 그 양쪽에 가보시면 테라스가 있는데요. 그쪽에 이렇게 여러 가지 공간을 만들어서 거기에 창업을 하는 사람들 혹은 뭐 작품 활동하는 사람들 와서 공간을 마음껏 쓸 수 있게 만들어 놨습니다. 저희가 맨 처음에 이 도심 재생을 생각하면서 그 성공하는 기준이 있어야 되잖아요. 뭘 하면 성공하는 거다 우리가. 근데 그 기준이 뭐였냐면은 이 다 허물어져가는 세운상가에 만약에 스타벅스가 들어온다면 우리 성공한 거다라고 생각을 했었어요. 근데 지금 보시면은 저 오른쪽 사진에 거기에 이런 트렌디한 카페들이 자리를 잡고 뭐 케이크 파는 샵들이 들어서고 젊은이들이 찾기 시작하고 했기 때문에 뭐 스타벅스가 들어온 거 이상의 그런 성과를 올렸다고 저희 생각하고 있습니다. 네, 세운상가에서 이런 일들이 있었으면은 사실 그 뒤에 이런 뜻을 공감하고 함께했던 아주 젊은 우리 동료들이 있었습니다. 사실은 저는 그들을 대변해서 이 자리에 서 있는 거고요. 그들의 열정과 그런 끈기 있는 이런 활동들 굉장히 아직도 지지를 합니다. 자, 이 세운상가의 팹랩 운영하면서 제가 마지막으로 겪은 일이 바로 4차 산업혁명입니다. 메이커 스페이스가 있는데 뭔가 만들어요. 그리고 하드웨어 창업이라는 게 있고 근데 그 뒤에 굉장히 거대한 물결이 다가오고 있다고 저는 생각을 했습니다. 왜냐하면 우리가 순수 IT만 바라보다가 이제 제조업 혹은 농업 1차, 2차 산업들을 바라보게 되고 있거든요. 거기는 인더스트리가 엄청 펀더멘탈하고 굉장히 큰데 이것들이 다시 우리 경제에 굉장히 큰 영향을 미칠 거다라고 생각을 했고요. 뭐라도 해야겠다라고 생각이 들어서 창업을 했습니다. 그게 바로 18벤처스라는 지금 제가 운영하고 있는 회사고요. 저희는 처음에 3D 프린터를 제조하는 일을 했었습니다. 3D 프린터는 오픈소스예요. 기술이 다 오픈되어 있습니다. 그래서 사실은 만들기가 굉장히 쉬워야 해요. 근데 저희가 이 제품을 만들기까지 너무나 힘들었어요. 어디에 어떤 사람이 어떤 제조 서비스를 하고 있는지 알기가 너무 힘들었어요. 예. 그리고 직접 방문했었어야 되고 비교를 해봐야 되고 이런 게 너무 힘들었어서 온라인에서 이런 서비스를 제공하자라고 생각을 했고 사실은 이러한 아이디어가 좀 모여서 저희가 지금 하고 있는 서비스를 구성했습니다. 저희가 지금 4차 산업혁명에 대해서 엄청나게 얘기를 하고 있고 저 역시 4차 산업혁명위원회 위원입니다만은 우리가 이 4차 산업혁명 얘기할 때 너무 기술만 얘기하는 것 같습니다. AI, IoT, 블록체인 이런 것들. 근데 그럼 과연 그 기술이 어떤 인더스트리의 접목이 돼서 거기 혁신시킬 수 있을까에 대해서 분명히 얘기를 해야 되고요. 그 과정에서 이 제조업을 무시할 수는 없습니다. 그래서 저희 서비스는 이게 저희가 만든 말인데요. Manufacturing as a Service. 그러니까 제조를 외부에 있는 리소스를 활용해서 서비스로 활용해서 하자. 그래서 이 온라인에 이런 플랫폼이 있다면은 먼저 장비가 연결될 거고 공장들이 다 연결될 거고 장비와 공장을 더 셈리스하게 연결시키기 위해서 IoT 디바이스들이 그 중간을 채우고 있을 거고요. 사용자들이 온라인에서 직접 제조를 오더할 수도 있고 혹은 이런 플랫폼을 사용해서 내가 나만의 제조업을 새롭게 공장을 신경 안 쓰고 영위할 수도 있고 또는 여기가 관련된 그런 비즈니스들 예를 들면 제조를 하려면 금융도 필요하고 세일즈 마케팅 필요하잖아요. 이런 것 다 여기 붙을 수 있다라는 개념으로 마스라는 개념을 만들어서 저희의 비전으로 삼고 있습니다. 저희가 생각하는 건 제조의 민주화이고요. 지금 현재 국내, 중국 이런 곳에 한 70여 개 정도 파트너 제조업체들을 가지고 있습니다. 그러니까 저희는 하나의 플랫폼인 거죠. 처음에는 3D 프린터를 사용해서 시제품 만드는 거에 집중을 했었는데 점점 다른 제조 영역도 온라인에서 서비스가 가능하다는 것을 발견하게 되고 그런 카테고리를 추가해 가고 있습니다. 이쪽 분야 인더스트리는 엄청나게 커요. 제조 서비스만 해도 전 세계적으로 보면은 2,500조 시장입니다. 우리나라도 한 82조 정도 되는 시장이에요. 여기는 하이엔드 제조, 뭐 디스플레이, 반도체, 뭐 스마트폰 이런 거 다 뺀 그런 수치입니다. 아시아에 제조 기반이 많이 넘어와 있어요. 사실은 미국도 제조업을 다시 본국으로 회귀시키자 뭐 이런 정책을 펴고 있고 우리나라는 아직까지 그 제조력을 갖고 있습니다. 그렇다면 우리나라에 있는 제조력 그리고 이 근방에 있는 아시아에 있는 제조력을 레버리지해서 글로벌리 서비스도 가능하다, 경쟁력이 있다라고 생각을 하면서 이 일을 진행하고 있습니다. 하드웨어 시대가 이미 왔고 앞으로도 한동안 계속 많이 펼쳐질 겁니다. 그러니까 그 시대에 맞는 그런 교육들이 우리 아이들에게 반드시 주어져야 된다고 생각을 하고요. 여러분이 생각하기에 굉장히 그게 리저너블하고 말이 되는 미래라면은 그럼 우리가 함께 그냥 만들어 나가면 됩니다. 제가 좋아하는 말 중에 하나인데 미래를 예측하는 가장 좋은 방법은 그 미래를 하나 만드는 거다. 근데 그 미래는 결국에 사람이 만들 텐데 우리나라는 비록 작고 인구도 다른 나라에 비해서 적지만 꼭 이런 미래를 커다란 나라에서만 만들어갈 필요는 없죠. 작지만 강한 우리 한국에서도 전 세계적으로 좋은 영향을 미칠 수 있는 그런 미래가 만들어지기를 기대해 봅니다. 여러분 경청해 주셔서 감사합니다.
네, 감사드립니다. 저희가 세 분의 그 이야기를 들었을 때 정말 결론적으로 생각하면 기술이 정말 중요한 역할을 하고 있구나. 그거는 저희가 벗어날 수 없을 것 같습니다. 그렇지만 또 동시에 이분들이 늘 말씀하시고 있는 것은 그 기술을 중심으로 해서 이루어지고 있는 또 다른 마인드셋들이 있는 것 같습니다. 오픈 소스를 공유하고자 하고 커뮤니티를 해서 그것을 다 개방하고 하는 이런 모든 것들은 기술 그것만은 아닌 것 같습니다. 그래서 이로 인해서 메이커 교육은, 메이커 무브먼트는 기술 플러스 어떤 다른 말로 하면 엔지니어링 그런 테크놀로지가 있지만 동시에 휴머니티도 있어서 이 두 가지가 합쳐서 메이커 그 무브먼트의 그 가치를 더 높이는 것 같습니다. 그래서 그것이 또한 우리 사회에도 여러 가지 영향을 미쳐서 산업 구조를 변화시키기도 하고 교육 그 모습을 변화시키는데 굉장히 중요한 역할을 할 수 있는 힘이 되는 것 같습니다. 이제 여러분들께서 이 스피커들의 그 발표자들의 강연을 들으시면서 질문을 올리신 것이 있는 것 같습니다. 가장 많은 좋아요를 받은 질문이요, 실비아 마르티네즈에게 주어진 질문입니다. 강의 초반에 메이커 교육에 있어서 구체적인 결과물도 중요하지만 그 과정의 중요성도 중요하다라고 말씀하셨습니다. 하지만 교육에서 평가와 결과를 무시하는 수가 없을 것 같습니다. 교육자 입장에서 특히 평가라는 것은 매우 중요한데 이 평가를 어떤 척도로 해야 될까요? 그것이 질문입니다.
That's a very common question. I think it's probably the one that I get most often. It is a very difficult question because our assessment system is not set up for the kinds of things that we're talking about. So it needs to change. We have to change this idea that we can test every kid for every little bit of knowledge that they have, when what matters is what they can do. And there's lots of ways to look at what people do and make decisions about that. You know, music teachers listen to someone play a violin and they can tell the difference between someone who just started and someone who's been playing for a while, and they can make suggestions to improve your fingering, to do very specific technical things that result in a better musical performance. And we don't question that kind of assessment. Teachers of writing read children's writing, and they know what a good essay looks like. In some cases, we're looking at things that we barely know what kids can do. What can kids do with a microcontroller? I'm not sure. I don't think I've ever seen a 10-year-old with a microcontroller for more than a week or two. What could they do if kids were taught programming for 2 years or 5 years? It would be amazing to see the results of what that would be. I think we're very early on, and we need to do a lot of R&D. Just like companies do R&D. We need to try a lot of things before we say, if we can't tell exactly what everyone is doing on October 13th, it's not worth doing.
Right.
시간이 다 돼서요, 더 재미있는 질문을 받고도 싶은데 어느새 이제 90분이 다 된 것 같습니다. 다시 한번 여러분한테 감사를 드리며 이 세션을 마무리하겠습니다. 감사합니다.
Thank you.